On Memorial Day at my lakeside home in Tennessee, surrounded by dozens of guests, I never imagined my own family would turn on me. My son-in-law's father threw me down onto the wooden deck and hollered, "He attacked me!" Lying there, shoulder dislocated, helpless to get up, I watched my son-in-law move toward me and say in a flat, cold voice, "Apologize to my father, right now." I held my tongue, but then my granddaughters spoke, and what they said changed everything, driving me to lay bare a truth nobody in that yard saw coming. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. If stories like this one speak to you, stay close and follow along so you don't miss what's coming next. Before we go further, I'd love to hear from you. When someone you love is in trouble, are you the type to step in right away, or do you wait and watch until you're sure of your footing? Drop your answer in the comments. One more thing, before we begin, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. Charcoal smoke curled up from the grill beneath the deck and tangled with the pine-warm air drifting in off the lake. Behind me, somewhere between 30 and 40 people were carrying on laughing bottles, tapping together plates, going hand to hand, as if the afternoon had nothing on its mind but being pleasant. I was standing at the rail with a glass of sweet tea, watching the way the light played across the water, and I gave myself one quiet moment to think of her. Vivian would have loved a day like this. I never heard Rustin Maddox cross the deck. The first thing I knew was both his hands hard, purposeful, mean, slamming into my upper back. No stumble, no loss of footing on his part. This was a deliberate shove thrown with everything he had. A shove that told you the decision had been reached well before he ever walked out that door. My glass caught the railing and burst apart. I pitched forward, twisted sideways, and the deck boards came up fast. A white-hot bolt of pain ripping straight through my right shoulder. Not the slow kind that builds, but the kind that lands all at once the way a door goes, when someone puts a boot through it. I threw my arm out to stop the fall and knew instantly I'd made it worse. The joint had gone somewhere wrong. Each breath after that felt like inhaling ground glass. I stayed on my side, jaw locked, fighting the urge to move, because movement made the pain spike. And then Rustin Maddox started hollering. He came at me, everybody saw it. This man came right at me. His voice rolled across every corner of that deck, big enough to kill every conversation, every laugh, every other sound. He tried to knock me down. I want witnesses. Did everybody see what he just did? Feet scrambled. Voices climbed. The whole party seized up the way a crowd does when the air goes out of a room. People pressed in along the upper edges of the deck, and what they got was a view of an old man stretched out on the boards, and Rustin planted upright face, blazing arms thrown wide, doing his best impression of a man who'd been gravely wronged. Not a soul had seen him throw the shove. Then Grady came down beside me, but his hand never touched my shoulder. Never asked whether I was hurt. Never did the one thing any son-in-law worth the name would do when his wife's father is lying busted up on the ground. Instead, he brought his face close to mine, close enough that only I could catch his words, his voice gone smooth and cold as riverstone. "Apologize to my father, right now, and I'll help you get inside." The pain was something extraordinary. My field of vision had begun closing in at the edges, and my right arm felt borrowed from somebody else's body. But I caught every syllable, every single one. I turned my head and looked beyond Grady's shoulder, hunting one particular face in the crowd until I had it. Dara was standing about 10 effed-back arms, crossed over her own chest, fingers dug into her forearms, knuckles pale. Her eyes met mine. I gave it a beat. 1 second, 2, 5. Then her gaze slid down to the boards. That was when the shoulder stopped being the worst pain I was carrying. Then I felt small hands on my face, gentle, warm, cupped soft against my jaw. I looked up into Nell's eyes. 6 years old, her pigtails half undone, a smear of ketchup on her chin. She had worked her way through every set of adult legs on that deck to reach me, and now she was on her knees on the hot wood, her little palms framing my face, wearing an expression of worry that no child her age ought to know how to make. "Ow, Grandpa Canfield, does it hurt? Tell me where it hurts." Something gave way in my chest deep behind the sternum. My good hand came up and folded over one of hers. When I spoke, my voice held steadier than I had any right to expect. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Stay right here beside me." Up above us, Rustin was still working the room. "Somebody needs to make this man apologize. My son needs to get control of his family." Grady rose to his feet. His jaw was locked, his eyes carrying nothing. He stared down at me, the way you look at a problem you plan to clear off your plate fast. This is your last chance. Say the words, and we put this behind us. I kept my eyes on my granddaughter, this little girl who'd pushed through a wall of grown people just to get down on the boards next to me. Something settled in my chest, quiet and certain. I set my good hand flat against the deck and started pushing slow, 1 inch at a time, teeth grinding against the pain, until I had myself upright enough to sit. Then I pushed further. My legs were unsteady and my shoulder was on fire, but I got up under my own power. I left Grady's hand where it was. I kept my eyes off Rustin. I faced the crowd. I'm not apologizing to anyone, loud enough to reach every corner of that deck. But there are some things I'd like to say, right here, in front of all of you. Grady's face went the color of old ash. There are times when the truth has no need to be shouted. It only needs to be said plainly with enough people present that pretending not to have heard it isn't an option. I was standing there with my right arm dead at my side and my shoulder blazing, and something settled over me that I hadn't known in years, a stillness running right through the middle of all that noise. The crowd had gone silent. 30, maybe 40 people drinks, suspended in midair, every conversation snuffed out. All of them watching to see what the old man would do. I took a slow look around that deck, past the coolers, the folding chairs, the paper lanterns Vivian had picked out 18 years ago, still hanging between the posts because I'd never had the heart to take them down. Does anyone here know whose lake house this is? No one spoke. A few pairs of eyes cut sideways. Somebody coughed. That boat tied up at the dock. I went on keeping my tone, even giving each question room to breathe. Who wrote the check for that? All this outdoor furniture, who bought it? What about the work on this deck 2 summers back? The new roof on the boathouse? 17 years of property taxes? Is there a single person at this gathering who knows who's been covering all of it? The silence thickened. Rustin's color had moved past red into something harder to name. He pushed forward, chin out. You're making a scene over nothing. Every person on this deck watched you lose your footing and stumble into me. I turned and fixed my eyes on him. Rustin, I'd like you to stop talking now. There was something in the way I said it, maybe the flatness of it. Men who are furious raise their voices. I was not raising mine. Then from somewhere off to my left, a heavy voice shoved through. Old man's here stirring up trouble at a family gathering. Somebody ought to put a stop to this. Floyd Maddox Grady's older brother, thicker across the shoulders, the sort of man who has spent his life mistaking a loud mouth for real power. He'd been the most vocal presence on that deck from the second I hit the ground, and he hadn't thought to ask once whether I was still breathing. I turned toward him. Floyd, I said, you've spent the last 10 minutes over there backing your father up. That's a loyal thing to do. A beat. You borrowed $14,000 from me in the spring of 2021. You said your wife couldn't find out, so we drew up a promissory note. That note is sitting in a lockbox at my house right now, your signature on it, and you have not sent me so much as a dime. The color ran out of Floyd's face so quickly it almost made you wince. His jaw came unhinged. Not a word came through. A murmur moved through the crowd like water finding a crack. Grady stepped toward me, his voice caught somewhere between a threat and a plea. This is not the time or the place to... Grady. I looked at my son-in-law, square, the man who'd been calling me Mr. Canfield for 12 years, who'd accepted money from me, a professional introduction, and the run of this property, and who had just leaned over my broken body to demand an apology instead of asking if I needed an ambulance. I have been patient with you for a long time. That's done now. Rustin made one more run at the crowd, his voice climbing. There's no proof of anything. He's an old man inventing stories because he can't stand that he fell. I didn't fall. The voice came from the far edge of the deck, quiet but carrying. Calhoun Birch stepped away from the group near the railing, a tall, spare man in his 60s. Vivian's age, someone who had held property across the cove longer than Grady had been alive. He was holding his phone out with the screen angled toward the people closest to him. I was out on the water with my telephoto lens, Calhoun said. I was shooting the herons on the far bank. I caught what happened up here on this deck by accident. He turned the screen so the nearest people could get a look. That is not a man who lost his balance. The crowd leaned in. I watched their faces shift one after another, the way lights go dark in a building after everyone's gone home. Rustin looked at the phone. His shoulders dropped half an inch, then a little more. The red in his face drained into something grayer and less certain, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, the man appeared to have nothing to say. I didn't wait around for him to find anything. I scanned the deck until I had Dara again. She was still in the same spot, still hugging her own arms, but her eyes had gone bright and wet, and for once she was looking straight at me, rather than at the floor. I crossed to her until only she could hear me. "Your mother would have been very sad today," I said quietly. Then I found Lester near the edge of the crowd. He already had his keys out, and I walked off that deck without looking back. The emergency room had the smell all emergency rooms carry: antiseptic and recycled air, and that particular brand of hush that settles over places where people are working hard not to come undone. Lester had driven me down the mountain and hadn't asked a single unnecessary question the whole way. That was the thing about Lester Pruitt. 31 years of close friendship, and he understood that sometimes the most a man can do for another is simply get behind the wheel. The attending physician was a compact, efficient woman who worked my shoulder over with practiced hands and told me what I had already figured out on the deck: traumatic dislocation. The joint had been driven clean out of its socket by a high-velocity impact. She used the word impact the way physicians do, flat, clinical, without judgment. But I understood what she was telling me. This was not what happens when an old man loses his footing. She slipped out to arrange imaging. For a few minutes it was just me and Lester and the steady pulse of a monitor behind the curtain beside us. Lester sat in the plastic chair next to the bed, elbows on his knees, turning his truck keys over and over in his hands. He looked over at me. "You doing okay, Ray?" "I've had better Sundays," I told him. He let out something that was half a breath and half a laugh. "You want me to call anyone?" I turned that over. The list of people I wanted to call was short, and the name at the top of it belonged to someone who had been gone 2 years. "No," I said, "not yet." The doctor came back, confirmed the dislocation on the images, and asked the question I hadn't known I was bracing for. "Is there any family here with you tonight, Mr. Canfield?" I looked around the curtain bay. Lester caught my eye and gave me a small, steady nod. "My friend is here," I said. The doctor gave a professional nod and moved on. Lester looked back down at his keys and let the silence stand, which was exactly the right thing to do, because there was nothing to say. 4 hours. That was what it took. I watched the clock above the supply cabinet the way you watch a clock when you're waiting for something that might not come. The procedure was behind me. My shoulder was locked in a sling, and the pain had shifted from something sharp into something deep and settled, the kind that makes itself known every time you change position. My phone had been silent since we left the lake house. Then at 7 minutes past 10:00 it rang. "Dara." I pressed accept and brought the phone to my ear. "Dad." Her voice broke right on that first syllable, splitting open like dry wood. "Dad, are you okay? How bad is it? Why didn't anybody call me? I just found out you went to the hospital and Where are you right now?" "Dara." A pause. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped. "I'm at the lake house." The ceiling above me was white and blank. I studied it. "Grady told you not to come." It wasn't a question. The small sound she made confirmed it all the same. Something between a breath and a word that never finished forming. "He said you tripped," she whispered. "He said you didn't need anyone, that you were fine, that making a big deal out of it would only—" Her voice broke apart. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have." "It's all right," I said. "I meant it. Not because it was all right, but because I wasn't going to burn what energy I had left being angry at Dara tonight. Go look in on Nell. Make sure she's settled down. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Dad." "Tomorrow, Dara." I ended the call. Lester looked at me. I looked at the wall. At 11:03, my phone rang again, Dara's number, but the voice on the other end when I picked up wasn't hers. It was small and careful, and just barely above a whisper. Grandpa Canfield. Nell's voice was so quiet I pressed the phone hard against my ear. "Are you still at the hospital?" My throat closed up faster than I expected. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm here. Where are you in my room?" I locked the door like you always say. A beat. Grandpa Canfield, Daddy, and Grandpa Rustin are fighting really loud downstairs. I could hear them all the way up here. I got scared, so I took Mommy's phone out of her purse. I sat up despite the flare that tore through my shoulder. "You did exactly the right thing calling me. Now listen, stay in that room, keep that door locked, and don't come out until your mama comes to get you herself. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." Another pause, smaller. "Grandpa Canfield, why doesn't Daddy like you?" That question reached somewhere I wasn't protected. I pressed my free hand flat against the mattress and breathed slowly through my nose before I answered. I don't know, sweetheart, I said. But here's what I do know. I'm going to stay right here on this phone until you fall asleep. So, just close your eyes. Let me hear you breathe, all right? Okay, she whispered. I sat in that hospital room, with the phone against my ear, listening to my granddaughter's breathing go slow and level out in the dark of a room she had locked herself into. Lester had stepped out to give me space, and the only sounds were the monitor next door and the soft exhale of a sleeping child 60 miles away. When I was sure she was out, I set the phone down on the bed and sat there with my hands folded in my lap. Beyond the window, the Tennessee night was solid black. Lester drove me home just before midnight. He offered to stay, and I told him to go get some rest, and we both knew I wouldn't be sleeping. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a good while before I reached over and turned on the lamp. The house held the particular stillness of a place that has been quiet too long, not peaceful, just hollow. Vivian used to say our house only felt like a home when at least 2 people were in it. She was right about most things. I brewed a pot of coffee I never drank and sat there and let my mind go back. The first time I ever set eyes on Rustin Maddox, he came through my front door with his son beside him. Grady was 23, clean-cut, presentable, the kind of young man who knew how to make a good first impression. He had asked to come meet Dara's family properly the old-fashioned way, and I had respected that. What I wasn't ready for was the father. Rustin walked into my living room, and his eyes didn't come to me first. They moved around the room instead, across the bookshelves, up to the crown molding, over to the bay window, looking out on the back garden. He took his time about it. Then he settled into the chair I offered, crossed one ankle over his knee, and looked at me with a smile that felt more like an appraisal than a greeting. "You've got a beautiful home, Mr. Canfield," he said. "Thank you," I said. From the armchair across the room, Vivian caught my eye. The briefest look, half a second, no more. But after 30 years of marriage, I knew exactly what it meant. I see it too. That was our signal, the one we'd built between us, without ever giving it a name. That small, quiet exchange that said everything without a single word spoken aloud. I should have paid it closer attention. Grady had been perfectly polite through the whole visit. Answered my questions straight, shook my hand with a firm grip, thanked Vivian for the coffee, and when they left, Vivian stood at the kitchen sink, watching their car back out of the driveway, and said very quietly, "Ray, something's not right about the father." "He was fine," I said. "A little rough around the edges, but fine." She turned from the window and fixed those steady dark eyes on me. "I'm not talking about his manners." I let it go. I was good at letting things go back then. I thought that made me reasonable. A year later, Grady needed money. He was starting a company, logistics consulting. He called it a genuine opportunity, but he needed seed money to get it moving. He came to us directly, and even then I appreciated that about him. Vivian and I talked it over at the same kitchen table, late on a Tuesday night, voices low so Dara wouldn't catch it from upstairs. "We could sell the small house on Linden Avenue," Vivian said. She folded her hands on the table and held my gaze. "The rental income is nice, but Dara needs this more right now." "That's 40 years of equity," I said. "It's also our daughter's future." She reached across and laid her hands over mine. Her palms were warm the way they always were. "We can rebuild equity, Ray. We can't rebuild family." So we sold. We handed Grady a check at closing, and he thanked us, shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "I won't forget this, Mr. Canfield." Mr. Canfield. Not once, not across 12 years of Sunday dinners, of Christmases, of the birth of his own daughter, did that man call me anything but Mr. Canfield. I had told myself it was simply his way. Formal, a little stiff. Vivian never told herself any such thing. "Ray," she said to me once, maybe 2 years into the marriage, "have you noticed he never stays a minute longer than he has to? He comes, he eats, he leaves. He never asks you anything about yourself. He doesn't remember what you've told him." "Some people are just private," I said. She gave me the look she gave when she'd decided not to push any further. Not because she'd come around to my view, because she'd recognized I wasn't ready to hear hers. I sat at that kitchen table in the small hours of that Monday morning and understood with perfect clarity that my wife had been trying to tell me something for over a decade, and I had responded each time by patting her hand and moving on to something else. In the last year of her life, Vivian had taken to writing things down. She had a blue spiral notebook she kept on the nightstand, and when sleep wouldn't come, she'd sit up and write by the glow of the small bedside lamp. I never asked what she put in it. I told myself it was hers, that it was private. What I really meant was that I was afraid to find out. I pushed back from the table and walked down the hall to our bedroom. I opened the nightstand drawer looking for her aspirin bottle, the one I still kept there out of habit. My hand found something else. A folded piece of paper tucked beneath the bottle, the kind torn from a legal pad, edges uneven, the handwriting unmistakable. Vivian's script a little unsteady near the end, the letters pressing harder into the page than they once had. I would have known it anywhere. The slight lean to the left, the way she bore down on the downstrokes. The letters bunching smaller and tighter toward the end of each line, as if she were trying to squeeze one final thought in before the space ran out. I carried the paper back to the kitchen table and sat under the lamp. The date in the top corner was from October of 2021, 4 months before she died, during the second round of treatment, when she was still well enough to sit up and write, but tired enough that some letters wobbled. I read it straight through. Then I set it on the table, pressed both palms flat against the surface, and read it again. Ray, if there comes a day when our girl doesn't seem to need us anymore, I want you to remember something. She will always need you. She just may not know how to say it, and the people around her may not let her. Don't wait for her to ask. Don't wait until it's easy. You were never a man who waited for easy. Don't start now. I love you more than you have ever understood. E. I sat with that for a long time. The kitchen held the kind of early morning quiet that feels different from the quiet of night. Lighter, thinner, as if the dark had been poured out and hadn't quite been replaced yet. The coffee maker clicked on by itself, the way it always did at 6:15, because Vivian had programmed it that way in 2007, and I'd never had any reason to change it. I got up and poured a cup I didn't need, stood at the counter and thought about what she had known and how long she'd known it. She had been trying to tell me for years, not through dramatic confrontations. Vivian wasn't built for those, but in the quiet, steady way she had of circling back to something until I finally engaged with it. A comment at dinner, a question on a Sunday drive, the press of her foot against mine under the table the first evening Rustin came into our home. And every single time I had answered her the same way, gently, reasonably, and completely wrong. She seems happy, Vi. He's not the warmest man, but he provides for her. Let's not borrow trouble. I set my coffee cup down on the counter harder than I intended. The sound cracked through the quiet like a small verdict. She hadn't been borrowing trouble. She had been watching her daughter disappear 1 year at a time, asking me to open my eyes. And I had been choosing comfortable blindness over an uncomfortable truth, because keeping the peace was easier than blowing it up. I had watched Dara grow quieter, more guarded. The way she phrased things when Grady was in the room, always hedging, always softening, always reading his expression before she finished a sentence. I had told myself it was just how she'd settled into herself, the natural caution that comes with marriage and responsibility. I had told myself many things that turned out to be convenient rather than true. The phone Dara didn't know I'd bought her, I'd gotten it 6 months ago from a prepaid carrier, a plain black rectangle with no contract, and driven it over on a Tuesday afternoon when Grady was at work. She had stared at it in my outstretched hand, then looked up at my face, and her eyes had gone bright and wet in a way that told me she understood exactly why I was handing it to her, without me needing to say a word. Grady can't know about this, I said. She nodded, blinking fast, pressing her lips together. Put it in your mother's sewing box, I said. The green one on the closet shelf. He won't go in there. She took it with both hands carefully, the way you handle something fragile. Then she wrapped her arms around me and pressed her face to my shoulder and held on without a word. And I stood in her front hallway holding my daughter and understood in a way I had been dodging for a decade exactly what kind of house she was living in. I drove home that afternoon, telling myself I was being careful, prepared, thinking ahead. What I was really doing was admitting what I already knew, had known longer than I was willing to say aloud, that something in that house was wrong, and I had been waiting for it to resolve itself, if I just gave it enough time, enough patience, enough money, enough silence. Vivian had known all of that. She had watched me know it and do nothing, and she had loved me anyway, and she had written it down in a blue spiral notebook in the last autumn of her life, just in case I needed to hear it from her one more time. I refolded the note along the same crease it already held and pressed it between my palms for a moment. Then I walked it back to the bedroom and placed it on the nightstand on her side, positioned so I could see it from the doorway. All right, Vivian. The empty room didn't answer. My voice had a roughness to it I hadn't planned on. I hear you. Back in the kitchen, I poured fresh coffee, settled into the chair with a notepad and a pen, and started thinking through what needed to happen. Vivian had a saying about paperwork file it, right the first time, because the moment you can't put your hand on something is guaranteed to be the moment you need it most. She'd been right about that, as same as most things. The banker's box lived in the back of the hall closet tucked behind the winter coats, and a broken umbrella stand I'd been promising to discard for years. Plain brown cardboard lift-off lid labeled in her handwriting along the side lake house property. Inside, 17 years of organized paper, sorted first by year, then by type tax bills, insurance renewals, contractor invoices, utility transfers, dock permits, inspection reports. Every check she'd cut for that property, each one documented in the memo line with the amount, date, and payee in her precise, unhurried hand. Vivian had never misfiled a document in her life. I lugged the box to the kitchen table and got to work pulling what I needed, photographing each page with my phone. Every time I reached across the table, my shoulder sent up a low, grinding protest. A physical reminder that yesterday hadn't happened in isolation. I moved through the stack the same way I'd moved through everything that ever truly mattered to me. No shortcuts, no skipping ahead, each piece settled before reaching for the next. Lester arrived at 8:30, carrying 2 coffees from the drive-thru on Depot Street, let himself in with the spare key he'd kept for 15 years. He surveyed the paper-covered table and drew out a chair without being asked. "Tell me what you need," he said. "What I need from you is a full account of what you heard at that party," I said. "Names, conversations, anything Rustin or Grady or Floyd said when you were close enough to catch it. Put it all down, as precise as you can, with times where you've got them." Lester's hand went into his jacket pocket and came out with a folded envelope already covered in his handwriting. "Already working on it," he said. "Haven't been to sleep since 5 Neuro. That was Lester Pruitt in a single gesture. I dialed my attorney at 9 Neuro. Wexler, careful, economical with language, 11 years, handling my affairs without ever adding a syllable he didn't need. I walked him through the events at the lake house, what the camera had caught, what Calhoun Birch had recorded on his phone out on the water, what was stacked on my kitchen table right now. He listened the whole way through without a question. "I'll get a power of attorney form out to you today," he said. "Standard language authorizes me to handle the property matters on your behalf while you're dealing with that shoulder. Once it's signed, I can begin formal notification to the occupants that the title holder is reclaiming exclusive use." A pause. "The deed has it always been in your name alone. Mine and my late wife's," I told him. "She passed in 2022. Full ownership came to me at that point." "Then this is clean," he said, and he meant it the way a man means something when he's already run the logic. "Paperwork reaches you by end of day." I thanked him and got off the call. Lester glanced over. "Wexler on it." "On it," I said. I turned the phone back over in my hand and found a number I hadn't dialed in almost a year. 3 rings. Then the voice I remembered, faintly gruff, divided attention. The sound of someone always partway into the next thing. Ray Canfield, Alton Greer, said. "Been a while." Alton and I had sat in the same church pew for 20 years before his firm moved him up to Nashville. Straight-dealing, fair-minded, the sort of man who'd grown his business entirely off his own name and didn't take that lightly. 12 years back, when Grady was hunting for his first real position, I'd put a personal call into Alton and told him the young man was worth a look. That call had opened the door that Grady's career walked through. "Alton Greer, I said I need roughly 15 minutes of your honest attention. There's something that happened this past weekend you ought to hear." A short silence, then the muffled sound of a door closing. "Go ahead, Ray." So I told him all of it. The deck and the shoulder, the footage Calhoun Birch had captured from out on the water, the 17 years of receipts laid out on my table, and the 12 years of Sunday meals where Grady had never once addressed me as anything but Mr. Canfield. No editorializing. No ask. I delivered the facts in sequence the same way Wexler had drilled into me plainly, without ornament. One thing following the next. When I finished, Alton held the silence for a long beat. "Ray," he said it quietly, "I owe you an apology." "Nothing to owe. I do." His voice had drawn tight in a way I wasn't used to hearing from him. I've watched that man for 2 years now with something I couldn't name and couldn't prove. Just a feeling I couldn't shake. I should have picked up the phone. "Alton, his contract file comes out today," he said. "That's all I can give you right now, because it's all I've got. But Ray, I'm glad you called." I set the phone on the table and looked at Lester. "Well," Lester said. "Well," I said back. Through the kitchen window, the morning had opened up bright and hot, the particular Tennessee summer light that hits you like a fist if you look straight into it. I poured a fresh cup and sat back down with the next stack of invoices. Plenty more paper still to go. I heard the engine before the car appeared, something smooth and expensive nosing into the driveway, the kind of vehicle that sees a car wash every Saturday and never accumulates anything in the back seat. I knew that engine cold. 12 years of it, pulling up to my house for holidays and Sunday dinners. Always spotless, always deliberate, the choice of a man for whom appearances were a form of discipline. I set the invoices flat on the table and looked at Lester. He looked back at me above the rim of his cup. "You want me to clear out? Go take the armchair in the living room," I said. "Position yourself so he sees you the second he steps inside." Something moved across Lester's face, not a smile exactly, but in the neighborhood. He collected his coffee and his notes and crossed into the living room, and that was that. I stayed put and waited. 3 knocks on the front door, spaced and deliberate, performing calm. I rose carefully, keeping weight off the bad shoulder, made my way to the door. Grady Maddox was standing on the porch in a pressed shirt, hands resting loose at his sides, wearing an expression I can only call professionally concerned, the same face he deployed at dinner parties, whenever conversation turned towards something uncomfortable. Measured compassion timed to the second. "Mr. Canfield," he said, "I'm glad I caught you. I was hoping we might talk." First time in the 12 years, he'd shown up at my door without backup. No Dara, no Nell, nobody to soften the space between us. Just Grady on my porch with his careful shirt and his careful face. "Come in." He moved through the front hall, eyes cutting immediately to the living room, finding Lester settled in the armchair, with his coffee and his folded envelope, watching him with the patient look of a man who has nothing pressing and no plans to move. Grady's jaw shifted barely a fraction, but I'd been reading that jaw for 12 years. I knew exactly what it was saying. I was hoping this could be a private conversation. His voice held steady, though, holding it cost him something. "Lester stays," I said. "Sit down, Grady." He took his usual chair at the kitchen table, the same seat from a decade of Sunday visits across from where Vivian used to sit, the place where he'd always managed 2 compliments about her cooking, while leaving most of it on the plate. He laced his fingers together on the tabletop and met my eyes with that composed, unreadable expression. "I want to apologize for what happened on Sunday," he said. "My father's not a patient man. Things got out of hand. I understand you're upset, and I think if we can all just take a step back." "How is your father's shoulder?" I asked. He blinked. "I'm sorry. Your father put me on the ground in front of 40 people on that deck, and your opening move was to get me to apologize to him," I said. "So, here's my question. His shoulder, is it bothering him? Trouble sleeping?" Grady's hands moved on the table. "Just slightly. I didn't come here to." "Nell rang me at 11 Sunday night," I said. "She used the phone I gave your wife. She'd shut herself in her room because the 2 of you were downstairs making enough racket to pull a 6-year-old out of sleep. She told me she was scared. I gave that room to breathe. You came here to talk, Grady. Then let's talk about that." Something gave way in the composure, just a hairline crack along the surface, and behind it was nothing resembling grief or regret. What I saw was calculation, the fast, almost mechanical recalibration of a man who had just realized the pieces on the board weren't where he'd left them. "I didn't know she called you." Quieter now, measured. "There's quite a bit you don't know," I said. "My attorney put paperwork in this morning on the lake house property. Formal notice will reach you before the week is out. I also had a conversation with Alton Greer yesterday. I kept my eyes on his face. He told me to let you know he'd be reaching out. Whatever color Grady had left in his face, it found somewhere else to be." "You called Alton." "Flat. Every trace of professional courtesy gone. Alton and I go back 20 years, I said. "We keep in touch." Grady shoved back from the table and got to his feet, and the whole pressed shirt controlled voice version of him had mostly fallen away, replaced by something harder and colder and a great deal more truthful. "You're making a serious mistake," he said. "Relationships that can't be fixed, you're gonna wreck them." "Over what?" My father had a moment at a party. I looked up at him from where I sat and kept every edge out of my voice. "What your father had wasn't a moment, Grady." He held off until Lester went inside, and Calhoun looked the other direction, and then he planted both hands flat on my back and shoved with everything he had. That's not temper, that's intent. Grady had nothing to offer in response. His mouth moved and accomplished nothing. "Lester will walk you out," I said. I lifted the invoice stack and found my place on the page again. From behind me came the sound of Lester's cup meeting the end table, then the creak of the armchair as he rose. Grady's footsteps went across the front hall. The door opened and it closed. Lester came back to the kitchen a moment later, settled into his seat, and wrapped his hands around his cup again. "Well," he said, "he took that better than I expected." "He didn't take it well at all," I said. "He just ran out of moves." Grady had announced himself with 3 knocks even patient. Rustin Maddox used his fist. It came at 4:30 on Thursday afternoon, heavy and insistent, the kind of pounding that shook the frame and sent the small hallway mirror swinging sideways off its hook. I was at the kitchen table when it hit me, and before I'd even risen from the chair, the sound alone had told me who it was. Lester was a few steps behind me in the kitchen. He'd left Wednesday evening and turned back up Thursday morning, carrying fresh clothes and a bag of groceries, because that was simply Lester Pruitt, and between the two of us, it had never required a conversation. When the knocking came, he looked up from his newspaper, creased it down the middle, and laid it flat. I crossed to the front door and pulled it open. Rustin was planted on my porch shoulders, back chin, outwearing the look of a man who had used the whole drive over to wind himself up to a pitch he meant to spend. He seemed larger than I'd clocked on the deck, or maybe it was the porch itself. My space, the ground he'd chosen, that made him fill more of the frame. "We need to talk," he said, not a request. "We can talk right here," I said, and I neither widened the door nor gave an inch of ground. His gaze moved past me and swept the interior, and when it landed back on my face, it carried the same thing I'd caught at the party, that specific contempt men like Rustin hold for anyone they've written off as unable to stand in their way. "You went after my son's job," he said. "You sent your lawyer after our property. You think you can just reach into our lives and pull out whatever you feel like." Every sentence climbed higher than the one before it. By the time he finished, he was nearly back to the volume he'd hit on the deck. "You're an old man living alone in a house that's too big for him, and you have no idea who you're dealing with." When I'd turned to open the door, I'd angled just enough. The small security camera I'd fixed to the upper corner of the porch overhang 18 months ago, after Vivian died, and the empty house began to feel less safe in the evenings, was sitting squarely behind my right shoulder. Its red indicator light pulsed in that slow, even beat it always kept while recording. I held off until Rustin drew a breath, then spoke calmly, making sure every word landed clean. "The camera above my right shoulder has been recording since you knocked. Everything you just said is on it." His eyes tracked upward and found it. The red light kept blinking. What crossed his face in that moment is something I won't soon lose. Not guilt men built like Rustin don't arrive at guilt quickly. It was closer to recalibration, the abrupt recognition that the room he'd stepped into bore no resemblance to the one he'd pictured. "That doesn't matter," he said, but the volume had fallen off and the certainty had gone soft at its edges. "I haven't said anything that was—" "You told me I have no idea who I'm dealing with," I said. "You said you could reach into people's lives. You showed up at my home without warning after your son received legal notice that I'm moving on property your family has been occupying without title. In Tennessee, a statement like that, delivered in that setting to someone with an active legal action against you, it carries a specific legal name." I paused. "My attorney will be glad to walk yours through it." Rustin's jaw tightened. "You're going to turn this into something it isn't. I'm going to turn it into exactly what it is," I said. Out of the house behind me came the scrape of Lester's chair leaving the kitchen floor, then his footfall in the hallway, easy, unhurried, purposeful. The particular sound of a big man making a quiet point about where he stands. He drew up at my left side and held there, arms relaxed, face giving away nothing. Rustin's eyes went to Lester, then to me, then back to the camera. "This isn't over," he said. All the force had bled out of it. Underneath the bluster, once it was gone, was something meaner and smaller, the sort of threat you make when the grand entrance hasn't played out and you need an exit that doesn't look like running. "I know it isn't," I said. "I'll be right here when it picks back up." He kept his eyes on mine for 3 more seconds, then swung away, went down the porch steps, and climbed into his car without a backward glance. I stood there and watched the car back down the drive and pull away down the street until there was nothing left to see. Lester exhaled a long breath at my shoulder. "He's going to do something stupid now." "Probably," I said. "That's what scared men do. You not worried?" I thought about Vivian's note in the blue spiral notebook she kept on the nightstand. I thought about Nell's voice coming through the phone, Sunday night small, careful talking in the dark. I thought about 17 years of invoices packed in a banker's box and the power of attorney sitting in Wexler's office as of that morning. I was worried for 12 years, I said. I'm finished with that. I went back inside and Lester came in behind me and I turned the lock on the front door. I knew it was Dara before I even touched the handle, not from hearing her car. She had always come in quietly, taking her foot off the gas, a full block out every time everywhere she went. The reflex of a woman who had spent years making herself undetectable before she arrived. I knew it was her because it was Friday afternoon. Because Grady would be grinding through whatever was left of his schedule while the rest of his professional life came apart around him. And because I'd been at this kitchen table for 2 days waiting for my daughter to make her way back to me. She looked like Sunday night's sleep had been the last she'd gotten. What you're about to hear is the moment everything that had been buried finally broke the surface. I want to ask you something before we get there. If you found out that someone you had welcomed into your life had been working against your family from the very beginning, would you say it out loud, or would you let your actions speak for you? Her eyes were puffy at the corners, and her shoulders held that particular tension of someone who has been keeping themselves upright through sheer force of will for so long it had started to show. She had on a gray cardigan. I recognized Vivian had given it to her 3 Christmases ago. The soft kind, the kind Vivian always picked, because she said Dara ran cold and needed the extra layer. She stood in my doorway looking at me, and her chin trembled once before she wrestled it still. "Can I come in?" she asked, as though she needed to be granted entry to the house where she had grown up. That question alone told me everything about what 12 years had cost her. "Dara," I said, "you never have to ask me that." She stepped through the door, and I brought her to the kitchen table, her chair, the one with the slight wobble in the left rear leg that I had never gotten around to fixing, because fixing it felt like rubbing something out. I put the kettle on. Vivian always held that tea worked better than coffee when somebody needed to talk. Then I settled across from my daughter and let the silence do its work. When I set the mug in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it, pressing her palms to the ceramic like she was trying to pull the heat directly into herself. Her knuckles had gone pale at the edges. "Grady told me what happened here," she said. "Both times. He said you were being unreasonable, that you've carried a grudge against him for years, and you were using all of this as an excuse to tear the family apart." "What do you think?" I asked. She dropped her gaze to the mug. Her jaw moved. "I think I was standing on that deck, watching my father on the ground, and I never took a single step toward him." Her voice split clean down the middle, on the last word breaking open the way wood does when the pressure finally finds the grain. "I didn't move, Dad. I just stood there." That word landed somewhere I hadn't braced for. She hadn't called me Dad in longer than I could put a number on. Whenever Grady was in the room, it had always been some careful, distant form of address, the kind of language people fall into when they've been slowly trained away from the natural one. "You were scared," I said. "Yeah, I was scared." She said it the way you say something you're ashamed of, rather than something any reasonable person would understand completely. I've been scared for a long time, and I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was reading too much into it, that if I could keep things steady enough, keep everyone settled enough, it would all... She pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes went bright and wet, and she blinked quickly, fighting it back. "Dara." I leaned in. "Look at me." She raised her eyes. "Your mother knew," I said. "She'd known for years. She tried to bring it to me, and I didn't hear her the way I should have. That falls on me, not on you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Her face gave way. Not all at once, but in pieces, her forehead first, then the corners of her mouth. The tears came, and she pressed the back of her hand hard against her lips. Her shoulders shook with the kind of crying that has been held in the past its time, the kind that costs something on the way out. I pushed back from the table and went around to her and put my good arm across her shoulders and held her. She turned into me and pressed her face against my shirt the way she had when she was 7 years old, and something in the world had been cruel to her. I rested my chin against the top of her head and let her cry until she'd worked through it. When the worst of it eased, she drew back and dragged her sleeve across her face, and I returned to my seat, and she met my eyes with red-rimmed ones and said, "He hid Mom's journal from me, Dad. I found it when I was going through his filing cabinet looking for property documents. It was sitting in a box in the back behind his tax records. 12 years. He held onto it for 12 years and never breathed a word." My grip tightened around my own mug. I kept my voice even. "I know. Did you know about the journal?" "No." I knew Vivian had kept things written down. I hadn't known she'd sent anything your way. Dara pressed her fingers against her closed eyes. She wrote me a letter inside it. She said she was afraid I'd forget that I deserved to be loved the right way. Her voice pulled thin and high, and she stopped for a moment, clamping her lips together until she had herself back. He read it, Dad. He must have read it. And then he put it away in a box and locked it in his cabinet. The kitchen sat quiet around us. Through the window, the afternoon light had turned golden, that particular shade that signals the day leaning into evening. Vivian had loved that light. She used to stop mid-task and simply stand at the window for a moment each time it arrived. Dara, I said carefully, I need to put something to you, and I need a straight answer. She wiped her eyes and gave me a nod. Are you safe in that house? Her mouth opened again. It's not like that. He doesn't. She stopped and took a breath. He makes me feel like I'm disappearing, she said at last. Like every year, there's a little less of me left over from the year before, but he's never know. I'm safe. I held her gaze for a long moment, reading it carefully. Then I nodded. All right, I said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you the name of an attorney, not Wexler, someone else. Someone who works family law. You're going to call her next week. Whatever you decide after that, I will be right behind you. Not out front making your decisions for you behind you. Do you follow the difference? She looked at me with those swollen eyes and dipped her head. Then she reached across and laid her hand over mine, and her grip was steadier than I'd expected. Dad, she said. I'm sorry it took me this long. You're here now, I said. That's what counts. The week after Dara came to see me, the world Grady Maddox had assembled for himself began pulling apart at the seams. Not in any dramatic fashion, not in a single moment. The way things genuinely fall apart, quietly in small increments. One support knocked loose at a time until the structure that had looked solid from the street turns out to have been resting on things that were never really his to lean on. Wexler called on Tuesday morning. The formal notification went out yesterday, he said. Certified mail delivered to the Lake House property. Mr. Maddox has 30 days to vacate and remove personal belongings. The deed has always been held solely in your name, Mr. Canfield. There's no legal ambiguity on our side. They have no claim and nothing to contest on. Have they responded? I asked. Their attorney sent a letter this morning, Wexler said, suggesting that your son-in-law's long-term use of the property amounted to implied permission of continued occupancy. Wexler's voice had the dry, unhurried patience of a man who has sat across from a great many creative legal arguments over the years. I've seen stronger cases built on considerably less. What does that mean in plain language? It means they have 30 days, he said. I thanked him and set the phone on the kitchen table. Lester, who'd had the sports section open across from me, looked up. Wexler, 30 days, I said. Lester turned a page. Good. Alton called Wednesday afternoon, and his voice had that careful, measured quality of a man selecting each word with professional precision. Ray, I want to be clear that what I'm about to tell you is a decision I arrived at based on what's best for my company and my own read of the situation. This is not about any pressure from your direction or anyone else's. I understand, I said. Grady Maddox's contract comes up for renewal at the end of the month, Alton said. After going through his performance record, his conduct file, and some conversations I've had with people on his team over the past 2 years, conversations I should have had, well before now, I've decided not to renew it. He'll get formal notice on Friday. The line went quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, a mockingbird was working through its whole catalog in the oak tree, cycling through 6 different calls without a pause between them. Alton, I said, I appreciate you telling me. I appreciate you being straight with me. 2 weeks ago, he said. I should have been asking harder questions a long time ago, Ray. That one's on me. After I hung up, I sat with that for a while. I hadn't asked Alton to do anything. I'd told him the truth and left the decision where it belonged, the way I should have managed it years earlier, instead of quietly going to bat for a man I'd already started to have doubts about. It was Dara who told me what happened when Grady got the news. She called Friday evening, her voice low and tight, the tone of someone speaking carefully, because they are in a house where sound carries. He came home at 2 Borazrevo, she said. He already knew before he stepped through the door. I could tell by the way he came through it. Are you all right? I asked right away. I'm fine. She exhaled. He threw his keys on the counter and looked at me and said, Your father did this. Your father called in a favor and got me fired, and you're going to stand there and let him do this to our family. A pause. Dad Alton Greer doesn't do favors. Everyone in Grady's industry knows that. No, I said. He doesn't. I told him that. Her voice evened out slightly the way a voice does when someone has finally said the thing they had been bracing to say and found the floor still solid under them. I said Alton Greer has been in this business for 30 years, and he has never once made a move based on a personal favor. And if your record couldn't hold up to somebody asking honest questions about it, that is not my father's doing. I pressed my palm flat on the kitchen table. My chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with my shoulder. How did he take that? He told me to choose, she said. He said I had to decide him or you. The mockingbird outside had gone quiet. The kitchen sat still around us. Dara, I told him I'd already chosen, she said. I told him I chose the man who drove himself to the emergency room with a dislocated shoulder rather than let a 6-year-old child watch her grandfather be humiliated. Her voice cracked on the last few words, but held together. And then I went upstairs and called the attorney you gave me the name of. I have an appointment Monday. Something in my chest came loose that I hadn't realized was wound up. Good, I said. I'm proud of you. Dad. A long pause. That Floyd called Grady yesterday. Did you know that? No. He said he was done, that he wasn't getting pulled into it anymore. She let a breath go. Grady asked him why. Floyd said, and I'm quoting exactly, because the man has paperwork, Grady. He has paperwork on everything, and he's not afraid to use it. Despite everything, despite the tight chest and the bad shoulder and 2 weeks of accumulated weight, I felt something that came very close to a smile. Lester was watching me from across the table with his eyebrows up. Floyd backed out, I said. Lester set down his cup. I had been awake since 4:30. That had become the pattern since Memorial Day, the body cooperating until sometime deep in the night, then surrendering and delivering me back to wakefulness, whether I wanted it or not. I lay in the dark with my shoulder aching in its low, persistent way, and listened to the house settle around me, all the small, familiar sounds of a structure that has stood for 40 years and knows how to talk to itself. The phone rang at 6:02. I had it off the nightstand before the second ring was through. Dara, Dad. Her voice was different. Not the careful, hedged version I had gotten used to from her over the years, the one that always seemed to be leaving room for walking something back. This was something else, quieter in a different way, more settled inside itself. I need to tell you something. I sat up and put my feet on the floor. I'm listening. I went into his office last night, she said, after he fell asleep. I needed to find the insurance papers for Nell's school physical, and I got into the filing cabinet. He keeps locked. A brief pause. I've had a copy of that key for 3 years. I had it made at the hardware store on Faro Avenue the morning he left his keyring sitting on the counter. I never used it before last night. Dara. There was a box at the back, she said, and her voice pulled tight for a moment before she got it under control. Behind his tax records going back to 2014. A shoebox Dad, brown with a strip of tape on the side, and my mother's name written on it in his handwriting. She stopped. I heard her pull in a slow breath. He labeled it. He put her name on it and filed it behind his taxes like it was something he had the right to keep. My grip on the phone tightened until the plastic gave a faint creak. There were letters in it, Dara went on. Cards your mother had sent me over the years that I'd always assumed were lost in one move or another. A photograph of the 3 of us at the lake house. I must have been around 12. Mom was laughing at something off to the side of the camera. You had your arm around her. I'd never laid eyes on that photograph before. Her voice went thin and high for a moment before she hauled it back down. And the journal, the one she kept all through her treatment. Did you read it? I read it until 3 Zooroners in the morning, she said. All of it, every page. A long pause. She knew everything, Dad. She put it all down in writing. What she was frightened of, what she was hoping for, what she'd wanted to say to me, and never quite found the moment for. I heard the sound of Dara pressing her hand over her mouth, muffling something working its way out. Then the last entry was 2 weeks before she died. She wrote, she said she was leaving the journal for me because she wanted me to have her words even once she was gone. She said she'd ask Grady to give it to me when the time felt right. The silence that came after had real weight. He decided the time never felt right, I said. For 12 years, Dara said. 12 years, Dad. I got up from the bed and walked to the window. The street outside was gray and still in the early morning light, the neighborhood not yet stirring, one lamp burning in the house across the way. Dara, what do you need from me right now? I need you to know I've made a decision. Her voice had come back to that steadier place, the one that had caught me off guard at the start of the call. "I'm calling my attorney at 8:00 when her office opens." She told me at our appointment to reach out the moment I felt ready to move forward. I'm ready. A breath. Nell and I are leaving today. While he's at his meeting this morning, I'm not taking much. Her things my things the box from his filing cabinet, and I need to know if we can come to you. Something in my chest opened so fast it nearly hurt. "You don't need to ask me that, either," I said. "You know where the spare key is, under the ceramic frog by the back steps," she said, and there was the faint shape of a smile in it. "Mom put it there in 1996 and you've never moved it." "It's worked this long," I said. "Dad." Her voice went soft. "I'm sorry it took me this long to get here." "You got here," I said. "That's the only part that matters." After we hung up, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and waited. At 8:15, Dara called back briefly to say her attorney had filed that morning for a temporary custody arrangement, a protective measure standard procedure in situations like hers that would establish legal documentation of Nell's residence while the formal proceedings got underway. The attorney had laid it out plainly. The order wasn't a judgment, just a safeguard to make sure neither parent could act unilaterally on the child's whereabouts while the case was being built. At 10:40, Grady called my number. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was 4 minutes and 20 seconds long. I did not listen to it. At 2:17 in the afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I went to the back door and had it open before Dara could knock. Nell came through first at a dead run, pigtails flying a stuffed bear tucked under one arm, and hit me at approximately knee height, with enough force that I had to grab the door frame with my good hand. "Grandpa Canfield," she announced into my stomach. "We brought 3 bags and a box, and Mommy cried in the car, but she said it was the good kind of crying." I looked up at Dara, standing in the doorway, 2 canvas bags over one shoulder, the shoebox tucked under her other arm, eyes red at the rims, but her chin level and steady. "Come inside," I said. "Both of you." Nell had opinions about where her stuffed bear should sleep. This turned out to be a matter of real consequence, requiring a full survey of the guest room, a debate over which pillow was softer, a short negotiation over the nightlight situation, and a final executive ruling that the bear, whose name I learned was Sergeant, would sleep on the left side of the pillow because that was the side nearest the door, and Sergeant preferred to keep watch. The last time a child had lived under this roof, Dara was 17. I had let myself forget what that does to a house, not the noise, but the sheer weight of a small person's presence in a room. A 6-year-old who has decided the new place is worth investigating rather than fearing will get into every corner of it, and Nell had made that decision the moment she crossed the threshold. Dara stood in the guest room doorway, watching her daughter oversee the bear installation, with the face of someone who has been sprinting for so long that being told she can finally rest hasn't quite registered yet. 2 inches had come out of her shoulders since she'd stepped through my back door. The hands I'd gotten used to seeing either knotted together in her lap or clamped around a mug were hanging at her sides, open and still. Once Nell had Sergeant arranged to her standards, she dropped off the bed, grabbed my hand, and marched me toward the kitchen, like she already knew the layout and had plans. "I'm hungry," she said. Not a question. "Can we have grilled cheese, whatever you're after?" I said. Dara trailed us in and took her usual seat, the one whose left rear leg has never sat quite level, and I set the skillet going and pulled out the bread and the cheese. For a stretch, the kitchen held nothing but the sound of butter working in the pan, and Nell keeping Sergeant informed in steady detail about every object visible from her end of the table. "That's a rooster clock," Nell said, pointing at the ceramic piece on the wall that Vivian had picked up at a craft fair in Chattanooga in 2005. "Grandpa Canfield, how come your rooster has a clock inside him?" "Your grandmother put it there because it made her laugh," I said. Nell thought that over. "Was she funny?" "The funniest person I ever came across," I said. "Stubborn as they come too, and sharper than anybody gave her credit for. If the 2 of you had ever been in the same room, you'd have gotten along just fine." Nell shifted her attention to the frame photograph on the kitchen shelf, Vivian and me at the lake house, 1986. Vivian's arm-out finger, pointing at something beyond the edge of the frame, her face wide open with laughter. "Is that her?" "That's her." Nell gave the photograph the slow, serious study children reserve for things they've quietly ranked as important. "She has nice eyes," Nell said after a moment. Something caught in my throat. "She did," I said. "She really did." I slid the grilled cheese onto a plate and put it in front of Nell, who went at it with the single-minded energy of a child who'd spent an emotionally demanding day burning through her reserves without stopping to eat. Dara circled her palms around the mug of tea I set down for her and looked at me over the table. "Grady rang me 6 times this afternoon," she said. "I know. He called this number too. I didn't pick up. No apology in it, no explanation. None of the low-level defensiveness that used to edge into her voice whenever she owned up to not doing something Grady had counted on. Just a plain statement, same as you'd used to say it rained earlier." "Good," I said. She rotated her mug between both hands. "He left a message. My attorney listened to it and called me back. She said it turned out to be useful for our side. I left it there. Whatever was in that voicemail belonged to Dara and her attorney." Nell glanced up from her sandwich, cheese still bridging her mouth to the bread in a single unbroken pull, and put her question to me with the blunt confidence that belongs exclusively to small children. "Grandpa Canfield, are we going to be here for a while?" I caught Dara's eye. Dara held mine. 30-some years of being father and daughter, everything that had built up between us distilled into one quiet exchange at a kitchen table without a word spoken. "As long as you need," I told Nell. Nell gave a firm nod and bit into her sandwich again. Then she set it down and fixed those eyes on me. Vivian's eyes right down to the shape of them, the kind that occasionally made me lose my breath, and said, "Can I just call you Grandpa instead of Grandpa? Canfield. Grandpa Canfield is really a lot of words." Something shifted behind my sternum. "Grandpa suits me fine," I said. The words came out rougher than I'd meant them to. Nell's smile broke all the way across her face, the full unguarded kind that children produce when a problem has been resolved to universal satisfaction, and she retrieved her sandwich and went back to eating. Dara reached over and covered my hand with hers. Warm and firm, the same grip she'd had at 9 walking beside me into church on Sunday mornings. "Thank you, Dad," she said low and even. "Stop thanking me," I said. "I know I don't have to." She held on a beat longer, then let go. "I still want to." The window over the sink had gone dark at the edges, evening arriving, the way it does in summer. Amber light pooling on the neighbor's roofline, the oak tree's shadow stretching long across the grass. Vivian's rooster clock read 6:45 on the kitchen wall. Sergeant the Bear sat propped against the salt shaker, running his watch over the table. For the first time since Memorial Day, the house didn't feel like just a Dara and Nell were at under by 900. I could tell because the house announced it the way old houses do, a particular deepening in the quality of the quiet when the last person under the roof has stopped holding the day. I went to the guest room doorway once and stood there until I'd confirmed that Sergeant was still occupying his assigned post on the left side of the pillow. Nell herself was sleeping the way children sleep, when nothing in their body is braced against the night on her back, both arms thrown wide, face slack and unguarded as open water. I stayed in that doorway past the point I'd planned to. Then I walked back to the kitchen, lit the small lamp over the stove, softer than the overhead, less like an interrogation, and took my seat with Vivian's note in front of me. 2 weeks of reading it had put every line somewhere past memory. But tonight was different from the other nights, my daughter down the hall, my granddaughter beside her, this house holding them both for the first time. The words landed in a different place than they had before, carried a different weight. Don't wait for her to ask. Don't wait until it's easy. You were never a man who waited for easy. Don't start now. I laid the note flat and pressed my palms against the table and studied the wood grain. The thing I had been moving around the edges of for 2 weeks, catching its outline in the dark, but not yet stepping up to it and meeting it squarely, was this: Vivian hadn't written those lines only about Dara. She'd written them about me, about what she knew I could do when I chose to, and equally what I could find ways not to do, because she had spent 34 years watching both versions of me operate, and she had mapped my blind spots with the precision of someone who loved me without requiring me to be better than I was. I had called it patience. I had called it keeping things from getting worse. I had told myself that the slow erosion I watched in Dara, the careful way she moved the words, she didn't finish the version of herself that kept getting smaller, was just the weather inside certain marriages, not mine to touch. What I'd actually been doing was identical to what I'd watched Dara do on that deck on Memorial Day, staying exactly where I was while something that needed stopping kept going. Because stepping in would have meant admitting I'd recognized it years ago and looked away on purpose. 12 years of staying where I was. The coffee beside me had gone cold. I moved it out of the way and sat with my hands folded and made myself go back through the moments I had deliberately not examined. The Christmas where Grady talked over a question someone had aimed at Dara, smooth and unhesitating, as though her answer wasn't a thing that needed to exist. The birthday dinner where he'd noted easy in public that Dara had put on weight since their wedding day. The phone calls where I'd registered how she shifted when he entered the room, clipped sentences more caution her attention, always angled toward wherever he was standing. Every last one of those moments had registered. I'd sorted them all into the drawer I kept labeled, "Not My Concern," and closed it again. Vivian hadn't kept that drawer. Vivian had stayed clear-eyed through all of it, and she had brought it to me in the tone she knew I could receive without going sideways. I had responded by squeezing her hand and offering that maybe she was putting more on it than was there. She had looked back at me with those steady dark eyes and let it go, because she could read when I wasn't ready to hear something yet. She'd been right about that part too. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. I looked at the screen. "Lester." I pressed accept. "It's past 10 o'clock, I said. "I know what time it is," Lester said. "I've been thinking about you sitting over there." "You doing all right? Dara and Nell are here," I said. A pause. Then quietly, "Good." "That's real good, Ray." "Yeah," I said. "It is." Another pause. The kind Lester and I had been trading back and forth for 31 years, long enough that neither of us felt any obligation to fill it. Then Lester said, "You've been sitting at that table thinking yourself in circles, haven't you?" Not a question. "Lester," I said, "I did the same thing she did, Dara. All this time, I've been sitting here telling myself she should have spoken up sooner, walked out sooner, drawn a line sooner. And I've been doing the exact same thing." The words came out with a roughness I hadn't anticipated, like something that had been kept in a dry place too long. Vivian told me more times than I can count, and I stood there nodding along, said everything that sounded right, and never did a single thing about it. For 12 years. Lester held his silence for a long stretch. When he finally spoke, his voice had that careful level quality it always took on, when he had something that mattered to say and wanted it to land right. "Ray, you with me? I'm with you. What you just said that cost something. Turning that around and looking at it straight, owning it, that's not a small thing." He paused. "Vivian knew who you were. She knew you'd find your way to this. That's the reason she left the note." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. My eyes were burning the way they hadn't burned since the night we put Vivian in the ground. That dry, tight, specific pressure behind the eyes, when something too big is trying to squeeze through too narrow a space. "I should have done better by both of them," I said. My voice had dropped to almost nothing. Vivian deserved a man who heard her the first time, and Dara deserved a father who didn't take 12 years to act like one. "Ray?" Lester's voice was firm, but not sharp. "You're doing it now? That counts for something." I sat there in the low light of the stove lamp in the stillness of a house where my daughter and granddaughter were asleep, and I pressed my free hand flat against the table where Vivian had sat for 30 years, and I let the burning behind my eyes run its course. It had been 2 years since we buried her, and not once in those 2 years had I let myself do this, not fully, because I had kept telling myself I needed to stay on my feet, stay useful, keep moving. I was done with that story. Lester didn't say anything. He just held the line. After a while, I cleared my throat and said, "I'm all right." "I know you are," he said. "Get some sleep, Ray. Tomorrow's a new day." I set the phone on the table. I folded Vivian's note back along the same crease it had always held, and pressed it between both palms. Then I got up, switched off the stove lamp, and went down the dark hall to the guest room doorway one last time. Nell had rolled onto her side. Sargent had toppled off the pillow, but was still on the bed, which I figured would be ruled an acceptable outcome by whoever was in charge of such things. I went to my room, lay down in the dark, and closed my eyes. For the first time in longer than I could easily account for, sleep didn't make me wait for it. Lester showed up at 7:45 with a bag of biscuits from the place on Caldwell Road that Vivian had always said made the best ones in the county. In 31 years of friendship, he had never once come to my door before 8 in the morning without a reason behind it. He set the bag on the kitchen table, helped himself to coffee from the pot I'd already brewed, and settled across from me, carrying the look of a man who has been holding on to something and decided this particular morning was when he'd set it down. Nell was still asleep. Dara had come to the kitchen doorway briefly still in her robe taken in the situation, accepted a biscuit from Lester, and carried herself and her coffee back to the guest room, with the quiet judgment of a woman who understood that the two old men at her table needed it to themselves for a while. I waited until I heard the guest room door pull shut. "All right," I said. "What is it?" Lester rotated his coffee cup on the table. He studied it for a moment, then raised his eyes to mine. "There's something I've been sitting on since Memorial Day," he said. "I held off saying anything sooner because I wasn't certain you were in a place where it would do any good. But after last night," he started again. "After last night, I think you need to hear it. Tell me." He put his cup down. "You remember Floyd had been drinking pretty steadily from around noon that day. By the time things went sideways on the deck, he'd had 4 or 5 beers, maybe more. He was over by the cooler talking to one of the cousins, and I was walking past them, heading inside, and I caught what he said." Lester's voice went careful and measured the register he used when he was relaying something he needed to get exactly right. He said, and I'm giving you his words as close as I can. He said, "You know the old man's property is the whole reason my brother was ever sent after that girl. Rustin picked her out before Grady even knew her name. Said she was the only child, said the father had assets. Told Grady just be patient and do it right." The kitchen went very still. I looked at the bag of biscuits at the cup in my hands at the window, where the morning light was coming in, flat and bright off the neighbor's roof. "Rustin picked her out," I said. "That's what Floyd said." I set my cup down with care. I was not surprised, and the fact that I wasn't surprised was something I needed to reckon with on its own. The pieces had been there the whole time. I had simply never arranged them, because arranging them would have meant facing the fact that I had handed my daughter to a man who had been pointed at her. "I remember the first time he came to this house," I said. "Rustin. He came along with Grady when Grady came to ask about Dara. I thought it was odd, a grown man bringing his father to ask a girl's family for permission to court her. But Grady was polite, the visit went smoothly, and afterward I told myself it was just the way their family did things." And Rustin Lester asked. He sat in my living room and took stock of every inch of it. I could see it as sharp as if it were still happening. That slow, deliberate sweep of Rustin's eyes across my bookshelves, my art, my bay window, my back garden. And then he said, "You have a beautiful home, Mr. Canfield." And I thanked him. I stopped. He wasn't paying me a compliment. He was running an inventory. Lester watched me from across the table. Vivian knew I said. She pressed her foot against mine under the table through the whole visit. That was our signal, her way of telling me there was something I needed to look at. Afterward, I told her Rustin seemed a little rough around the edges, but nothing to worry about. My jaw tightened. She never agreed with me on that. She just quit pushing because she could tell I wasn't ready to see it. "What are you going to do with this?" Lester asked. I sat with the question for a long moment. A car moved past on the street outside. The refrigerator hummed. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of Nell's voice working through what was probably her morning briefing to Sergeant. "I need to tell Dara," I said. "You sure? She has a right to know how it started. She spent 12 years inside a marriage that had been designed around her without her knowledge," I said. "She deserves to understand what she was actually walking into, even if learning it now can't undo what's already done." Lester gave a single nod. "How are you going to say it?" "The way Vivian always said hard things to me," I said. Straight out, no softening. I called Dara at 10:30 after Nell had eaten breakfast and been set up in the backyard with a box of sidewalk chalk and instructions to draw something worth seeing. Dara sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands around a fresh cup of coffee, eyes steady and still, and I laid out everything from Lester's account of Floyd's words by the cooler through what I remembered of Rustin's first visit to this house, to Vivian's foot, pressing against mine beneath the table, while we all made polite conversation. When I finished, Dara was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her coffee, then back up at me. "Did you know?" she asked. "Before now." "Did you suspect?" I held her gaze. "Something, yes," I said. "Not anything I could name. But I made a choice not to press it because pressing it would have meant giving up the easier story I was telling myself. I let that sit a moment. The fault there is mine, Dara, not yours. I need you to know that." Something came into her eyes, a shine sudden and quick. She pulled her lips tight, held them there, then released a slow breath out through her nose. "I think part of me knew something, too," she said, her voice barely above a murmur. "Not the specifics, not what Floyd said to Lester, but this feeling underneath everything, like the ground never quite sat level, like it was never quite what it was supposed to be." Her gaze dropped to her own hands in her lap. "I didn't have anywhere to put that feeling, so I just closed the door on it." "Same," I said. "I closed that same door." She raised her eyes. What had been shining in them a moment ago had resolved into something quieter and more solid. "We're not doing that anymore," she said. Not a question. "No," I said. "We're not." And right then, Nell's voice cut across the yard. She'd finished her drawing, and we had to come see it immediately. She said right now, because it was extremely important, and it was Sergeant on horseback, and it was the greatest thing she had ever created. Dara laughed wide open. Nothing held back the laugh of someone who has finally set something heavy down and got up from the table. I walked out behind her into the brightness of the morning, and the day spread itself around us, plain and unhurried, and for a stretch of time, that was all we needed. The drive up was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I had covered that road more times than I could count. Vivian beside me, in the early years, reading whatever novel she was, in the middle of reading passages aloud, whether I asked or not. Dara small in the back seat, wanting to know every 20 minutes whether we were close. And more recently, just me alone with the muscle memory of a route I no longer had to think about, my hands already turning before the curve appeared. This time it was a Saturday morning in late August, early enough that the road wasn't yet busy. The windows down, the Tennessee air moving through the car, warm and weighted with pine and red clay. I stopped at a gas station outside Cookeville, pulled in, bought a coffee I had no real use for, and sat with the engine off for 10 minutes, watching the lot without seeing it. Then I started the car and went. I wasn't afraid to be going back. What I wanted before I got there was to be sure I understood why I was going. Not to stand in the wreckage and take stock. Not as some kind of ritual reminder of what had been done. I was going because the place had been mine, had been ours long before any of what happened, and it was time to walk back into it on those terms. I turned off the road and into the gravel lot at 2:30. The property wore its late summer look, the grass gone shaggy down near the dock, the south-facing wall of the boathouse thirsty for paint. Pine needles banked up along the bottom of the deck stairs, where no one had bothered with a broom. Grady's family had taken everything out 2 weeks ahead of the deadline. Wexler had confirmed it, with the muted satisfaction of a lawyer who built his case for the long fight, and then watched it end without needing most of his ammunition. I stayed in the car a moment, hands still on the wheel. Then I climbed out and came around to the deck. The boards underfoot were unchanged. The railing was unchanged. The 2 porch rockers that Vivian had insisted on buying in 1993, because she maintained that a lake house without them was an incomplete thing, sat exactly where she had first put them. The wood gone, the silver gray of something that has absorbed 30 Tennessee summers and earned every year of it. I crossed to the far railing, the exact spot I'd occupied when Rustin came up at my back. I stood there, looked at the planks beneath me, pressed my right foot down on the spot where I'd gone down. The shoulder had mended. The doctor said there'd be stiffness when the cold came in, and he was right about that. But the mechanics were sound. I rotated it slowly. Testing, it answered fine. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out Vivian's photograph. Before leaving the house, I'd lifted it from the frame on the kitchen shelf, the one from 1986. Vivian mid-laugh, her arm extended towards something beyond the frame, hair falling loose, the lake hammered silver in the background. The wallet copy I'd carried for years had softened and dimmed until her face was more impression than image. This one held every detail. This one was still her. I settled into her chair, always the left one, because she'd said the angle of the afternoon light was better from that side, and set my eyes on the water with the photograph in my hands. The lake was making its slow afternoon change, the blue thickening towards something heavier. Long, splintered reflections moving across the surface where the light came in low. Out at the far bank, a great blue heron was standing in the shallows, motionless in the way only a heron can manage doing the patient work of its kind. Vivian had a deep affection for the herons. She claimed they were proof that stillness was a form of mastery, and that people would do well to study it. "I'm back," I said to the photograph, to the lake, to whatever presence Vivian had left behind in a place she had given 30 years of herself to. My voice didn't break, which I hadn't been certain it wouldn't. It took longer than it should have. But I'm back. I let that settle. On the far bank, the heron made a small adjustment, a half-step sideways, and went motionless again. "Dara is all right," I said to the photograph. "Better than all right, if I'm being honest. She sits down with her attorney every 2 weeks, and she is working through all of it with a steadiness I'm not sure I could have found at her age. She's sleeping through the night, she told me herself, that hadn't happened in 3 years. I went quiet for a moment. You already knew she wasn't sleeping, didn't you? You were lying awake over it. and you said nothing to me, because you understood I'd find some way to make it worse. The lake moved in small ripples. The heron held its ground. And Nell calls me Grandpa now, I said. Just Grandpa. She concluded that Grandpa Canfield was too many syllables, and honestly, she's not wrong about that. I looked at Vivian's face in the photograph, that laugh with nothing behind it but pure delight. She got your eyes, Vi? I should have said that to you plainly a long time ago. She has your exact eyes. A car rolled across the gravel. I stayed where I was. Door footsteps on the stones, then on the boards of the stairs. And then Lester came around the corner of the deck, carrying 2 cups from the thermos that went with him everywhere, wearing the unhurried look of a man who got in his car and drove 2 hours because a friend said he could use the company. He put one of the cups in my hand, then settled into my chair, mine being the one that was open since I was in Vivian's, and turned his face toward the lake without making anything of it. No traffic to speak of, he said, though I hadn't wondered. Good, I said. We drank our coffee. Neither of us rushed it. The heron unfolded its wings and rose from the shallows with that improbable slow-motion heave that always seems like it can't possibly lift. A bird that size climbed away over the water and vanished behind the trees on the far shore. You holding up out here? Lester asked. Yeah, I told him. I really am. He gave a single nod. This answer hadn't surprised him, and leaned over to pick up Vivian's photograph from the arm of the chair where I'd set it. He studied it a while. She'd have loved this, he said. The whole thing, what you did, how you did it. She'd have loved watching you pull it off. My throat closed up. I kept my eyes on the water, on the empty spot where the heron had stood. I know, I said. I just wish she could have been here for it. Lester returned the photograph to the arm of the chair, with both hands careful with it, the way you are with something that isn't yours to be careless with. She was, he said. One way or another, Ray, she saw it. We stayed until the sun dropped below the far tree line, the lake losing its color and then its light, and the first stars appearing above the water. 2 old men in 2 old chairs, and there was nothing left that needed saying. Dara had brought it up gently with the careful hesitation of a person who was still finding her way back to believing she was allowed to want things, whether she and Nell might spend a weekend at the lake house before the season closed out. The way she framed it reached all the way back, the same soft uncertainty she'd carried as a little girl, when she wasn't sure the answer would be yes. It took me a beat to recognize what I was hearing, and then another beat to absorb the quiet sadness of it. After that, I told her the lake house belonged to her every bit as much as it did to me, and she was never to ask permission to come to it. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Okay, Dad," in a voice that told me that particular truth would need some time to take root. We made the drive up on a Friday evening, and Nell talked without stopping for the full 2 hours, cataloging everything she intended to do once we arrived. Catch a frog, find a flat rock, master the art of stone skipping, determine whether fish could actually hear human conversation, and settle once and for all whether the water ran cold enough to be refreshing or merely cold enough to be miserable. By the time the gravel crunched under the tires, I had received a thorough briefing. Nell was out the door before the car finished stopping, sprinting for the dock, with her laces already coming loose, calling back over her shoulder that the water temperature question could not wait. Dara stood by the car and took in the lake, the house, the deck. I watched her face move through several things in the space of a few seconds, a tightening around her eyes that I knew well, then a long exhale, then something releasing, settling, easing toward calm. "You doing okay?" I asked. She kept her eyes on the deck a moment longer. "I am," she said. "I expected it to hit harder coming back." She tilted her head a little. "It mostly just feels like the lake house." "That's what it is," I said. Out on the dock, Nell had dropped to a crouch with one hand in the water, reporting her findings to the general public at full volume. "It's cold," she announced. "But the good kind, Grandpa. Definitely the good kind." Dara laughed, and every bit of the tension around her eyes let go. We spent the afternoon the way that place was built to be spent, without a schedule, without a plan. I settled on the deck with a book that I made slow progress through, because Nell materialized at my side on a regular basis with discoveries, questions, and matters she deemed urgent. A flat rock of considerable promise had been located. She had concluded that fish could probably hear you, but had decided not to engage. And there had been a preliminary frog sighting she rated as extremely exciting confirmation pending before sundown. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, Dara came outside and took her mother's chair. No ceremony to it, she just walked out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, left one on the arm of my chair, and sat down in the left one. She looked out at the water, then dropped her gaze to the arm of the chair, and moved her fingers slowly along the weathered wood. Mom used to sit here, she said, not a question. Every afternoon she could manage, I said. She always said the light was better from that angle. Dara studied the way the sun came low and flat across the water, and gave a slow nod, storing it away. She was right, she said. We watched Nell wind up and release a stone at the lake. It hit the surface at a sharp angle and went straight down. Nell declared immediately that it was a warm-up and should not be included in the official record. Dad, Dara said it without turning from the water. I need to ask you something, and I need the honest answer. Always, I said. Do you think she was happy? A pause. Mom, on balance. Was it good? The question came to rest on the deck the way the afternoon light did, quiet and exact. I thought about Vivian in that very chair, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, watching the herons work the shallows. Vivian at our kitchen table on Sunday mornings. Vivian at Dara's college graduation, crying freely and without the slightest embarrassment, saying she couldn't stop. That it was all just too much in the best way. Vivian in those final months writing in her blue spiral notebook, by the glow of the nightstand lamp, still finding things that were worth recording. She was happy, I said. She had difficulty the way everyone does. She worried about you far more than she ever showed. She was frustrated with me more than she usually let on. I stopped a moment. But yes, her life was good. She loved it, Dara. She loved it right up to the end. Dara pressed her lips tight. Her eyes had gone bright. She gave one careful nod, the way you receive something fragile that you need to carry without dropping. Then Nell came pounding up from the dock, shoes-drenched face absolutely lit up. I found a frog, she hollered. He's over by the big rock, and he's green and very fat, and I named him Alton. Dara swung her eyes to me, both brows up. Alton Greer will never know, I said. Dara covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders going. Then she gave up trying to keep it contained and laughed all the way, head-tipping. Back the sound of it, carrying out across the water, and the heron out at the far bank raised its head for a moment, then went back to its work. I showed Nell how to properly skip a stone, just as the sun was dropping. She got it on the third attempt, 2 clean hops before it went under. The shriek she sent up scattered every bird on that side of the lake. Dara stood behind us, cheering as if it were the single most significant event of the year. Maybe it was. The Sunday morning routine had found its shape the way good routines tend to, not planned, just repeated each week, pressing a little more firmly into the one before it, until it was simply how things went. Dara was always up first and had the coffee going. I'd come out to find 2 full cups already waiting on the counter, which I had told her 3 times was unnecessary, and which she had gone right on doing anyway. Nell surfaced somewhere between the 2 of us, her arrival usually announced by the thud of Sargent hitting the floor when she climbed down from the bed, and she'd show up in the kitchen in her pajamas, hair pointing in every direction, with strong views on the subject of breakfast. This particular Sunday, the first week of December, she wanted pancakes. Grandpa makes the best pancakes, she told Dara, with the gravity of someone delivering a factual report rather than flattery engineered to produce pancakes. Grandpa's right here, I said. I know, she said. That's the reason I said it. Dara's hand went over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. I started the batter. Nell pulled herself up into her chair at the kitchen table. She had claimed the one with the wobbly back leg, which had apparently been Dara's, on the grounds that a chair with some instability was more interesting than one that just sat there and arranged Sargent on the table in front of her, in a position she described as ready for breakfast. Grandpa, she said, watching me at the stove, what happened to the people who were mean to you? The question landed flat and direct, the way Nell's questions did the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who hadn't yet been taught to come at hard things from the side. I flipped the first pancake and thought through how to answer it true without handing her more than she needed to carry. They're dealing with what comes from making bad choices, I said. That's generally how it goes. Nell sat with that. Are they sorry? I don't know, I said. That part is up to them. Are you still mad at them? I thought about Rustin on the porch that day, the bluster going out of him, like air from a punctured tire, when he understood things hadn't gone the way he'd planned. I thought about Grady at my kitchen table in his pressed shirt, that composed face of his, and the moment a crack had appeared in it. I thought about all the year's Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings, holidays at the lake house, all of it running on something I had chosen not to follow back to where it started. And not anymore, I said. Staying angry burns energy. I'd rather put that energy somewhere it does some good. Nell nodded satisfied and returned her attention to ensuring Sargent was properly positioned for the meal. Dara looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup. I looked back at her. Something moved between us that had no need of language, the particular shorthand of two people who have been through the same fire and come out the other side still upright. After breakfast, Nell determined that the small pond 3 blocks from the house demanded immediate attention. There had been, she explained, a credible report of an unusually large turtle, and this was not the kind of thing you could simply leave alone. We walked the 3 blocks in the December cold, with Nell between Dara and me, a hand claimed on each side, launching herself forward every 4 or 5 steps, with the easy certainty of a child who has no doubt whatsoever that the 2 people holding her will hold on. The pond sat still in the winter light. Bare trees and a pale gray sky lay reflected on its surface, and a pair of ducks drifted unhurriedly along the far side, indifferent to our presence. Nell let go of both our hands and moved straight to the bank, beginning her turtle survey with the focused, deliberate energy of a naturalist who considers the work important. Dara stood next to me with her hands tucked into her coat pockets and watched her daughter crouch at the water's edge. Her attorney filed the final paperwork on Tuesday. She said no lead up to it. She didn't say whose attorney. We both knew. It'll take time, probably sometime next year, but it's moving. How are you feeling about it? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the water. Relieved, she said. Mostly that. A little sad, but not in the way I expected to be sad. Not over him. She stopped. Over the version of things I thought it was going to be back at the start before I saw it for what it really was. That's not an unreasonable thing to grieve, I said. She nodded. Then her shoulders drew back slightly, that small, unconscious squaring that had been showing up more and more lately, the one that hadn't been there before the summer. But I'm good, Dad. I want you to know that. I really am. I know, I said. I can see it. Nell glanced up from the bank. No turtle yet, she reported. But there's a very interesting stick, and I think the ducks are watching me. The ducks are definitely watching you, Dara said. Good, said Nell, and turned back to the water. I looked out across the pond, the bare trees, the 2 ducks Nell hunkered at the bank, with her coat bunched around her knees. Dara beside me, shoulders squared, eyes clear. The December air was cold, but not sharp. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking urgently about something only it could see. I thought about Vivian the way I thought about her every single day. Not with the breathless, bottomless grief of that first year, but with something calmer and more livable. The way you carry a person when you have made your peace with the fact that carrying them is simply part of how you move now. I thought about what she had written. Don't wait for her to ask. Don't wait until it feels easier. I hadn't waited, not this time. Grandpa, Nell's voice rose from the bank clear and certain. Come look, I think I found the turtle. I went down to the edge and crouched beside her. She pointed toward the base of the reeds where something dark and rounded was just barely there, suspended below the surface. She was nearly trembling with the effort of holding herself still enough not to send it off. Her small fingers wrapped around my sleeve, her eyes locked on the water, with total unwavering concentration. You found him, I said, keeping my voice low. I told you he was there, she whispered. Her grip on my sleeve drew tighter. I told you! I laid my hand over hers, and we stayed motionless together at the water's edge, watching the turtle that had been there all along, waiting for someone with enough patience to look. Behind us, I heard Dara settle onto the bench at the edge of the path. I heard her let out a breath, long, slow, finished. The turtle rose to the surface, considered us briefly with the ancient indifference of its kind, and slipped back under. Nell turned to me, eyes wide and lit up. Did you see? I saw, I said. She threw her arms around my neck with the full force of a 6-year-old who has just witnessed something extraordinary and cannot contain it a second longer. I held on. Looking back at all of it, now I understand what I couldn't see clearly for 12 years. If you've stayed with me this long, I think you already know why this story mattered. Thank you for being here. Looking back at everything that happened, the years I kept quiet, the things I chose not to see, the morning Dara showed up at my door in Vivian's cardigan, I understand now what that season cost me. It cost me time I can't get back. But it gave me something I wasn't expecting, a second chance to be the father my daughter needed and a granddaughter who calls me Grandpa, without any extra words attached. I believe God doesn't waste the hard years. The Lord's timing is slower than we'd like, and it doesn't always look the way we imagined, but it tends to be exact. Here is what I'd pass along to anyone carrying a story like this one. Don't wait for the people you love to ask for help. Go first. If something beneath the surface never quite feels right, trust that feeling. Silence is not the same as peace. When the truth finally comes out, let it do its work. You don't have to add to it. And hold on, because the father stories worth telling are usually the ones that almost didn't make it. These grandpa revenge stories find their way to people who need them. And if this one reached you at the right moment, I hope you'll share it with someone who could use a reminder that it's never too late to show up. Leave me a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. And if you haven't yet come back and subscribed to Grandpa's Revenge, there's more where this came from. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.